Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My parents spent $60,000 on my sister's wedding and didn't even invite me. Yeah, you heard that right. Not a call, not a card, not even a pity text with one of those fake-ass "wish you could be here" lines. Just silence. I found out about the whole damn thing through a Facebook post, one of those obnoxious highlight reels with soft focus filters, champagne glasses raised in perfect symmetry, and my sister Rachel's over-whitened teeth gleaming in every frame like she just won some kind of beauty pageant for people with no soul. I sat there staring at the screen, the caption burning into my brain, "Best day ever." Surrounded by everyone who matters. Everyone who matters. That line stayed with me, like a nail driven into my chest. I read it again and again, each time hoping I'd somehow miss something, that maybe I'd see a tag or a photo of me standing in the corner, awkward but included. But there was nothing. Not a trace of me in the whole event. Not a single goddamn pixel. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. See, in my family, I've always been the spare part. The extra piece in a kit that no one knows what to do with. Rachel was the golden child from the moment she popped out of the womb. Blonde curls, dimples, high-pitched giggle that made people melt. I, on the other hand, came out quiet, thoughtful, observant. I didn't throw tantrums or chase attention. I didn't need to be the center of every room. And for that, I was labeled the difficult one. Isn't that funny? Being calm made me difficult, but Rachel's high-maintenance drama was somehow lovable. Growing up, the difference was never subtle. Rachel got piano lessons, dance classes, expensive summer camps. I got told to be grateful for hand-me-downs and silence. When she wanted a car for her 16th birthday, she got a brand new convertible with a red bow on top. When I turned 16, I got a used bike with 2 flat tires and a sarcastic "happy birthday" card that had clearly been recycled from the junk drawer. By the time we hit our 20s, the divide was a canyon. Rachel stayed close to home, kept up the performance, weekly brunches with mom, shopping trips with dad, constant social media uploads showing off the perfect life they built around her. I moved 2 states away, started my own art studio, poured my energy into something that felt like mine. I wasn't rich, but I was independent. I wasn't married, but I was free. And somehow, that freedom made me unworthy in their eyes. They never said it outright, of course. They never had to. It was in their tone when they asked if I was still doing that art thing. It was in the way they introduced me to people. "This is Claire. She's very creative." Like I was a stray dog they were reluctantly claiming. But I swallowed it. I swallowed every goddamn bite of it for years, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd see me for who I really was. Hoping that one day I'd stop feeling like a ghost at my own family's table. That hope died the day I saw that wedding post. I sat in my apartment for hours that night, scrolling through photo after photo, watching my family pretend I didn't exist. I saw my mother beaming in a sequin dress she probably spent a fortune on. I saw my father giving a toast, holding Rachel's hand like she was the crown jewel of his life. I saw old family friends, childhood neighbors, distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my mother. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice as cheerful and hollow as ever. "Claire, darling," she said, like nothing was wrong. I didn't bother with small talk. I just asked, straight out, why wasn't I invited to Rachel's wedding? There was a pause, just a beat, but in that pause, I swear I could hear her smirk. "Oh, Claire," she said, her tone slipping into something colder, sharper. "You're single." It would have been embarrassing. Just like that. No apology, no hesitation. Like it was a perfectly logical answer. Like my existence was a goddamn stain on the wedding photos. I didn't even respond. What could I say to something like that? I just stared at the phone, feeling something snap inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift, like a final piece falling into place. I'd spent years trying to earn a seat at their table, trying to make them see me. But in that moment, I finally understood something I should have known all along. You can't force people to love you the way you deserve. And you sure as hell can't beg for respect from people who get off on making you feel small. I ended the call without another word. Not a goodbye, not a scream, not a tear. Just silence. The same silence they'd always given me. But this time, it wasn't weakness. This time, it was the beginning of something else. Something stronger. Something colder. And as I stood in my kitchen, staring at that last wedding photo still open on my phone, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to let them keep their perfect little fantasy world, just long enough for it to fall apart in their hands. They thought I was invisible. They were about to find out how wrong they were. It was the very next morning when she came strutting through my front door like she owned the goddamn place, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor with the kind of confidence that only comes from being completely blind to your own cruelty. Rachel didn't even knock, just waltzed in like she was doing me some grand favor by gracing me with her presence, as if this was just another chance for her to flaunt her perfect little life in my face. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, still processing the slap-to-the-face phone call from our mother the night before, when I heard her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Claire," she sing-songed, like a woman drunk on her own smugness, "thought I'd come by and show you a little something. Thought you might appreciate it since you missed out on the best day of my life." I didn't move from where I stood. I just looked up slowly, taking in the sight of her flawless makeup already smudged from the drive, hair too perfectly curled to be real, eyes glinting with the kind of artificial glee that only people like her know how to weaponize. She was holding a glossy envelope in one hand, and before I could even ask what she wanted, she pulled out a large photo print and shoved it directly into my face, like it was some kind of holy relic. It was her and her new husband, some finance bro with the personality of dry toast, posing in front of an ivy-covered wall, both of them laughing like they'd never known a single ounce of discomfort in their lives. Her dress sparkled like a chandelier under perfect lighting, her hand placed just so on his chest like she was trying to sell a goddamn lifestyle brand rather than commemorate a marriage. Her voice cut through again, sharp and smug. "Best day ever," she said, that same line from the caption, only now it felt more venomous. "You'll never have one." She smiled then, wide, white, practiced. That smile wasn't joy. That was the smile of a woman who'd been waiting years to twist the knife in just the right spot. That was the smile of a sister who believed, with every ounce of her hollow little heart, that she'd won something and that I'd lost. She was gloating, not celebrating. It wasn't enough for her to have her big wedding. She needed to rub it in, to remind me that in her eyes, I was still the outsider looking in through the window. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I didn't tell her to get the hell out, though every part of me wanted to. I just stared at the photo for a long, slow moment, then looked up at her and said nothing. And I think that unsettled her more than anything else could have. Because when you're used to people reacting, begging, arguing, defending themselves, silence becomes a threat. Then, slowly, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small cream envelope. I didn't rush. I didn't make a show of it. I just slid it across the kitchen table and tapped it once with my finger. She looked at it like it was some kind of joke, like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or roll her eyes. And I just said, calm as anything, "You sure about that?" Rachel hesitated. She glanced at me, then down at the envelope, then back at me again, like she couldn't decide whether this was some sad attempt at competition or something more. Finally, she opened it. She pulled out the photo, just one, and stared. Her face changed before my eyes. The smirk vanished first, slipping off her lips like it had never belonged there in the first place. Then her eyebrows pulled in slightly, confused at first, then startled, then, finally, furious. Her hands trembled just a little, enough for me to notice, but not so much that she'd admit it. And that silence, God, that silence, was sweeter than anything she could have said. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak, to ask something, to demand an explanation. But I didn't give her the chance. I just took another sip of coffee, slow and deliberate, like I had all the time in the world and none of it belonged to her. Then I stood up, took the photo from her hand, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it neatly on the table. I walked toward the door, opened it, and held it wide. "Enjoy your honeymoon," I said without looking back. I didn't slam the door when she left. I didn't need to. The sound of her heels clicking away, faster this time, did all the talking for me. For 6 long months, I kept a secret so close to my chest that not even my closest friends could have guessed what was really going on behind my carefully measured silences and vague smiles. It wasn't because I was ashamed or unsure or hiding anything out of fear of rejection. No, it was because what I was protecting wasn't just personal, it was strategic, it was delicate, and it was deeply entangled in something much bigger than a simple love story. The truth is, I had been living a double life, but not in the dramatic, soap opera sense that people like Rachel might fantasize about. Mine was quieter, more calculated, more dangerous in a way that would have thrilled her if only she had the mental range to grasp it. His name is James Whitmore, though most people know him by the name he signs at the bottom of some of the most explosive investigative reports in the country. He's not flashy like Rachel's husband, not one of those grinning golden retrievers in a tailored suit who talks about quarterly projections at dinner parties. James is sharp, deliberate, and magnetic in a way that draws people in without him saying a damn word. He doesn't brag, because he doesn't need to. People listen when he speaks, not because he demands attention, but because he says things that actually matter. We met in the most ordinary place you could imagine, a bookstore cafe where I'd gone to escape the noise of my studio and the static of my own thoughts. I was flipping through a weathered art anthology, and he was reading a legal case file printed so densely it looked like it had been pulled straight from hell. I don't remember what we said first, only that the conversation never really stopped after that. I liked how his mind worked, the way he asked questions like he actually cared about the answers. I liked the way he watched people, not to judge them, but to understand them. But here's the catch, and it's a big one: James wasn't just any journalist. He was knee-deep in a multi-year investigation into corporate fraud, embezzlement, and systematic abuse of power by several high-ranking business executives, one of whom happened to be my father. That wasn't something I found out on the second date, obviously. That piece of the puzzle didn't click into place until much later, after I'd already fallen for him, after we'd already built something real and fragile and dangerously beautiful. When he told me the full scope of what he was working on, I remember sitting across from him in stunned silence, a coffee cup in my hands going cold as the weight of it all sank in. He didn't know, at first, that my last name linked directly to one of the companies on his investigation list. He just knew me as Claire, the artist with paint-stained fingers and too many thoughts to contain. But when the truth came out, neither of us flinched. We didn't run from it. We leaned into it, understanding that what we had wasn't something that needed to be plastered all over social media or paraded around like a trophy. So we kept it private, not out of shame, but out of necessity. He needed to protect the integrity of his work. I needed to protect the only part of my life that hadn't been chewed up and spit out by my family's toxic orbit. We had dinner in quiet places. We traveled under the radar. We even took our engagement photo in an old greenhouse tucked behind a friend's property, surrounded by ivy and filtered sunlight, just the two of us standing in that soft, timeless space where nothing else existed but the way he looked at me. No staged poses. No forced smiles. Just something real. That was the photo I slid across the kitchen table. That was the image that stole the breath out of Rachel's lungs and replaced it with something sharp and bitter. And what made it worse, what made it sting in that deep, poisonous way only truth can, is that the photo wasn't just beautiful. It was intimate, elegant, effortless. It wasn't about money or spectacle. It was about connection, something she could fake for a camera but never actually feel in her bones. And here's the kicker, the one that made her hands tremble and her mouth go dry. James isn't just respected, he's feared in circles where reputations are currency and exposure is death. He's richer than her husband, smarter than her husband, and carries more quiet power in one sentence than that entire wedding venue full of people clapping like trained seals ever could. She saw it instantly. She saw it in the way we stood together in that photo, in the way his hand rested gently against my waist like he wasn't claiming me, but honoring me. She saw it and understood, finally, that I hadn't lost some imaginary race. I just refused to run it. I hadn't shown her the photo to prove anything, not really. I'd shown it because it was time to shift the weight, to tip the balance of power that had always tilted in her favor. I hadn't wanted to upstage anyone, but now, after everything, I was done shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for me. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them drown in their own petty comparisons. Because the truth was right there on the table, framed in light and ivy and silence, and it spoke louder than anything I could have said. There's something undeniably satisfying about watching a house of cards fall, not because you knocked it over with a dramatic gesture, but because you left just enough breeze in the air to let gravity do the rest. That's exactly how I approached it. I didn't shout my truth from the rooftops. I didn't parade James through town with a banner and a bullhorn announcing our engagement. I didn't need to. I knew that the truth, when crafted with precision and released in just the right way, would do far more damage than any screaming match ever could. It started small, almost imperceptibly, like a slow drip from a leaky faucet that no one bothers fixing until the floor's already soaked. A carefully timed photo posted by a friend, nothing overt, just me and James standing side by side at a charity event, his hand resting casually at the small of my back. No hashtags, no captions drawing attention. Just a moment, captured and shared. But it didn't take long for the ripples to start. Within days, the questions began circulating through the very same social circles that once treated me like a footnote. Rachel's friends, those same Botox-polished women who wouldn't give me the time of day 5 months ago, suddenly started whispering at their brunch tables, their wine-soaked voices edged with curiosity and just a hint of envy. Did you see Claire's fiancé? He's a catch. Isn't he the guy from that article in the Times? He's way more successful than Todd, don't you think? I didn't have to hear these conversations to know they were happening. They reached me through the grapevine, friends of friends, mutual acquaintances, a cousin's girlfriend who ran into my mother at church and couldn't help but mention how radiant I looked in that photo with James. The same cousin who later asked, casually but pointedly, why Claire hadn't been at the wedding anyway. The seed had been planted, and now the roots were spreading deep through the foundation my family had built on appearances and hierarchy. My mother, of course, heard the whispers too, only she didn't know what to do with them. For someone who'd spent her life polishing her image like a goddamn trophy, it must have been agonizing to feel it slipping from her fingers. She started calling me more frequently, leaving stiff, overly polite voicemails with questions she pretended were casual. Just wondering how things are going, sweetheart. We haven't heard from you in a while. Translation: who the hell is this man you're with, and why is everyone talking about him like he's royalty? I didn't respond. Not once. Not a single returned call, not a single breadcrumb. I let the silence speak for me. And in that silence, their curiosity turned to anxiety, their pride to panic. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what they didn't know, and more importantly, what everyone else seemed to know before they did. Meanwhile, James's exposé was picking up momentum. The kind of momentum you can't stop once it starts rolling downhill. His article series was being picked up by national outlets, dissected on podcasts, quoted in business journals. And slowly, inevitably, the names involved began to surface, one by one, like rotten fruit falling from a tree. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the first mention of my father's name. It wasn't a full exposure, not yet. Just a subtle reference tucked within a paragraph, a mention of senior leadership figures in affiliated firms, paired with a timeline that mirrored his tenure at one of the shell companies under scrutiny. But it was enough to send shivers through anyone who knew how to read between the lines. Rachel, in particular, began to unravel. Her carefully curated life, which had always been built on the assumption that we'd all continue playing our designated roles, started showing cracks. Her husband, Todd, began asking questions she didn't have answers to. Friends she used to impress started pulling away, shifting their attention to the person she'd spent years dismissing as a failure. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was relentless. She tried to fight it, of course. She started posting more aggressively on social media, photos from the wedding, smiling selfies with Todd, inspirational quotes layered over filtered images of sunsets and wine glasses. But desperation has a smell, and people noticed. She was spiraling, grasping at relevance while the center of gravity in our family dynamic shifted quietly beneath her feet. My father, for his part, began retreating from public appearances. The man who used to strut through business conferences like he owned the air in the room was suddenly canceling meetings, turning down speaking engagements, and issuing vague press statements about business restructuring. He must have known what was coming. He must have felt the walls inching closer, the air growing thinner. But through it all, I said nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt them with my victories. I just let them sit with the silence. The same silence they once used to punish me, now echoing around them like a curse they brought on themselves. And the beauty of it all, the cold satisfaction pulsing beneath my calm exterior, was knowing that this wasn't even the climax. This was still just the calm before the storm. Because I hadn't even shown my full hand yet. There are certain moments in life that feel like a slow-motion detonation, where the silence after the blast echoes louder than the explosion itself. And this was one of those moments, a quiet devastation that began not with fire or fury, but with ink on paper and the unrelenting weight of undeniable truth. James's exposé finally dropped on a cool Monday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels strangely still, like the world knows something is about to shift, but hasn't yet figured out how to brace for it. I was sitting at the window of my studio when I saw the first headline crawl across the news feed, stark and bold, screaming in clean font what I had known for months was coming: systemic corruption, financial manipulation, bribery buried beneath layers of shell corporations, and cover-ups so intricate they practically danced off the page. The names were printed in black and white, and there among them, like a bruise you can't unsee, was my father's. No more hints, no more subtle references, no more polite language wrapped around criminal behavior. His name appeared twice on the front page and 3 more times inside the article, each mention linked to dollar amounts, insider testimonies, and a detailed timeline of unethical decisions that had long been whispered about behind closed doors, but never before brought into the blinding glare of public scrutiny. The man my family had so proudly propped up as a pillar of community success, as a moral compass for friends and colleagues, was now exposed for exactly what he was: just another greedy bastard in a tailored suit, hiding behind handshakes and boardroom charm. And still, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't send a message or leave a comment or even make a single social media post. I didn't need to. The truth had its own voice now, and it was louder than anything I could have said. My silence, in contrast, had become a kind of thunder. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to reach my family. By midday, Rachel had already scrubbed her Instagram clean of any mention of our father's name, replacing posts with vague affirmations and passive-aggressive quotes about resilience and overcoming obstacles, though I doubt she even understood what half of them meant. My mother, ever the loyal image keeper, went dark altogether. No calls, no texts, not even a meaningless apology. She was busy doing what she did best, pretending nothing was happening while everything around her fell apart. But I had one last move to make, and I intended to make it in person. That Friday night, I accepted an invitation I hadn't received. My family was hosting one of their regular dinners, an excuse to maintain their performance of normalcy for whatever friends hadn't yet caught wind of the disaster unraveling beneath their roof. I didn't announce my arrival. I didn't ask permission. I simply walked in through the front door, James at my side, his presence immediately silencing every shallow conversation in the room. I could feel the tension drop like a bomb the moment we stepped into the dining area, my mother stiff as a corpse in her chair, my father pale and blinking like a man watching the scaffolding of his life collapse one beam at a time, and Rachel clutching her wine glass like it was the last thing tethering her to sanity. No one spoke at first. No one dared. The weight of the article still hung in the air like smoke, and they all knew it. James nodded politely, the way only someone completely comfortable with confrontation can, and then took a seat beside me like he'd done it 100 times before. I reached into my bag, pulled out a printed copy of the exposé, and slid it across the table until it stopped directly in front of my father. The paper landed with a quiet finality that felt more powerful than any insult I could have delivered. He didn't touch it at first, just stared down at it like it was something venomous. My mother's hand twitched slightly, like she wanted to snatch it away, to hide the evidence before anyone else could read what they already knew. But it was too late. The truth was public, and pretending otherwise was a fool's game. After what felt like a full minute of silence, Rachel finally broke, her voice sharp and brittle as glass. "So what now, Claire? You think you're better than us just because your boyfriend writes hit pieces?" I looked at her slowly, calmly, and let the question hang in the air like a rotting fruit. Then I smiled, not smug, not cruel, just tired of pretending. "No," I said, my voice steady and low. "I always was. You just refuse to look." And for the first time in years, I watched her break, not in some dramatic meltdown, but in a subtle, crushing shift that twisted her entire face. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. She just stared at me, silent and stunned, as the words sank in deeper than anything else I could have thrown at her. No shouting, no spectacle, just a truth that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage or pride or vindication. I just felt free. Some storms don't announce themselves with thunder or lightning or a sky cracking open above your head. Some storms come slowly, silently, creeping in beneath the surface, until one morning you wake up and everything familiar is waterlogged and ruined beyond recognition. That's exactly how the fallout began, not with a bang, but with a quiet unraveling that even the most stubborn denial couldn't patch back together. My father's empire didn't collapse overnight, but the foundation beneath it had been rotting for years, and now the rot was exposed for everyone to see. What followed wasn't sudden chaos. It was a slow, humiliating dismantling of everything he'd built, brick by brittle brick. The first hit came from the investors, those fair-weather cowards who once toasted him at galas and sent him expensive cigars on his birthday, now fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Accounts were frozen, contracts were voided, partnerships dissolved faster than smoke in wind. The media storm didn't relent either, and his face, once a fixture in glossy business magazines and local news puff pieces, was now plastered across headlines that read like obituaries for a legacy he'd so carefully crafted. Corruption, fraud, deceit. His name was no longer a symbol of power. It was a punchline. He tried to salvage what he could, of course. Hired lawyers, released statements, sat down for an interview that aired for exactly 3 minutes before being buried by a more compelling scandal. But it was over, and he knew it. I don't know what was harder for him, the financial loss or the loss of control. The man who once couldn't stomach a dinner conversation without dominating it now barely spoke at all. He became a ghost in his own house, a hollow figure surrounded by the ruins of his own making, and not once, never, not even in private, did he pick up the phone to call me. My mother fared no better. She withdrew so deeply into herself that she might as well have disappeared. Once obsessed with appearances, with polish, with keeping up the illusion of perfection, she now barely left the house. The woman who used to strut through country club events with her pearls and her practice laugh had become someone else entirely, brittle, quiet, twitchy with shame. I imagine the whispers from her friends, the pitying glances, the half-hearted attempts at sympathy, all stung worse than outright ridicule. Because nothing kills a social climber faster than the slow drip of condescending pity. She had spent her entire life cultivating status, only to end up a cautionary tale in someone else's dinner party anecdote. And Rachel? Her mask cracked the quickest. Her marriage, which had always been a glossy facade built on shallow compatibility and mutual vanity, couldn't hold up under the pressure. Todd, her perfect little finance boy husband, started asking questions. Real ones. About money. About ethics. About the kind of family he'd married into. He didn't like the answers. He didn't like the scrutiny. And he especially didn't like being the guy whose father-in-law became the headline scandal of the quarter. The tension built in small ways at first, snapped words at dinners, awkward silences during parties, but it grew, and it grew fast. It didn't take long before Rachel began to spiral, and this time, there was no one to catch her. Her friends were fading away, the invitations were drying up, and even her social media, once a nonstop stream of curated joy, began to reflect the truth she couldn't hide anymore. Filtered smiles turned into cryptic captions, vague posts about new beginnings, and trusting the process. I didn't need to ask to know they were unraveling. I could see it in the forced cheer, in the increasingly desperate tone of her online life. She'd built her world on shallow praise and empty validation, and now she was choking on it. But here's the part they never expected, the twist that none of them saw coming. I didn't invite them to my wedding. Yes, I married James. Yes, it was beautiful. But no, there were no elaborate venues, no designer gowns flown in from Paris, no guest lists bloated with people who'd never known real intimacy. It was small, candlelit, quiet in the way only something genuine can be. Just a few close friends, soft music playing from an old speaker, vows whispered under a canopy of string lights and ivy. There were no camera crews, no theatrics, no performances. Just love. Just truth. After the ceremony, as we stood in that stillness with the air thick with warmth and candle wax and laughter that didn't come from obligation, I looked out over the small group of people who mattered, and then I looked straight into the camera, the one a friend had brought, nothing fancy, just enough to capture a moment, and I said, "Funny, turns out you don't need a $60,000 wedding to have the best day ever." I don't know if it was revenge. Maybe it was. Maybe a part of me wanted them to feel what I had felt all those years, what it meant to be excluded, dismissed, belittled by people who should have loved you without condition. Maybe I wanted them to sit in their own silence and wonder how they became strangers to their own daughter. Or maybe it wasn't about them at all. Maybe it was just about reclaiming something they'd tried to take from me since the beginning: peace, dignity, identity. The story didn't end with a confrontation or a blowout or some Hollywood-style redemption arc. It ended with a whisper, with a choice, with me standing in the truth while they drowned in denial. Some people want revenge. I just wanted them to see the truth and choke on it.